Let's turn our attention now to some steps that are increasingly being taken to internationalize the rupee. For example, India and the UAE have signed a pact where the rupee can be used for the settlement of bilateral trade, and other such agreements are being signed elsewhere. Now, it's early days yet to actually assess the full impact of these moves, but what is clear is India's intention, whether it is the currency agreement with the UAE or partnering with a slew of countries, the latest being France, to extend the linkage with our digital platform, payments platform UPI. The aim is clear, to try and find ways to internationalize the Indian rupee. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India has released a report outlining the path for this. However, there are questions like what happens to the volatility of the rupee with potentially multiple such bilateral arrangements actually being put into place. Also, some would say that if India's eventual aim should be capital account convertibility, are such agreements the right way forward? But the other big angle here that we must keep in mind is that the supremacy of the US dollar is being questioned more and more. There have been multiple attempts to try and challenge the supremacy of the dollar, particularly by China, of course, which has long been trying to position the yuan or the renminbi as an international currency. Many European countries have also given up their own currencies to adopt the euro and try and make that into some sort of a global currency. But that was promising as an initiative initially, but things did change after the European crisis. Now we are seeing what seems to be a growing trend of emerging economies trying to reduce their reliance on the US dollar. But the larger question is, how plausible is a scenario where the US dollar is not the world's default currency? And for India, the question is, can the rupee ever actually become something that will become a major currency being used and traded around the world? And for more on that, it's great now to be joined by Dr. Ajay Sahai, DG and CEO of the Federation of Indian Export Organization, and also Dr. Subhadra Rao, who's the founder of Quantico Research. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, interesting arrangements, Dr. Sahai, that have been put into place between India and the UAE, for example. How do you see this panning out?
Yeah, absolutely. India is more integrating into the global trade, and they are also looking into joining the global value chain. From that perspective, we are looking into the free trade agreement, both with a view to give our push to the trade, and also whatever little investment we are getting it, we want that we should propel those investment, giving them the better market access to the free trade agreement. At the same time, we are also looking into that a lot of countries in the world, they are moving away from dollar and any other foreign currencies. They are short of foreign exchange also. That provide us an opportunity to look into trading with them in the local currency and also trading in the Indian rupees. So with these objectives in view, the Reserve Bank of India has provided the facility of trading in Indian rupees, and of late we have seen with Singapore and with now UAE, we are looking into a swap kind of local trading arrangement as well.
Dr. Rao, this entire question of being able to trade in Indian rupees, that's not that we haven't done this in the past, but is it something that can become a mainstay for Indian trade going forward? Because I guess there's also that question of how much requirement that country has for Indian rupees. What is the actual balance of trade and how much requirement they have for Indian rupees before they're willing to shift everything to trading in the rupee?
No, I think very well put, Vikram, because this is a time where globally, India is being perceived as the most attractive destination, be it for portfolio investment and more importantly for the foreign direct investment. And at a time when the world is looking at diversifying its sources of goods and services, I think India is perhaps in the sweetest spot ever. And this is the time where policymakers, both at the government and the central bank, will have to think through a long-term game plan where we can aspire to increase our share in total trade and exports. Currently, we are at a minuscule of 2% or 2.2%. But for Indian rupee to become a huge reserve currency or the biggest trading currency, we obviously need to expand our footprint across the global trade map. Having said, I think these initial steps are are absolutely well-timed, well opportunistic, if I may say so, in a nice way, in a positive way, because as Dr. Sahai put it, we are already underway of foreign trade agreements whereby we can, look country-specific in terms of settlement of our trade in local currencies, as we have initiated with UAE.
Dr. Sai, do you think these things should continue to be done on a one-by-one bilateral basis? Or from a trading point of view, is it better to simply join one of the larger trading organizations? So you can do, you can do a lot of individual FTAs, or you can just come up and join the last trans-Pacific trading blocks, for example, or other things that do exist?
No, in fact, I think it's, of course, very well said that we should look for a kind of a regional agreement rather than a country-specific agreement. But then the negotiation becomes quite difficult. We know that we are struggling to form up one with the EU for last many years, because when you're dealing with 28 economies, the political setup keeps on changing a lot. So dealing with one country becomes little easier. So my personal take is that we should pick up one or two important countries into a regional bloc, form up with the trade agreement with them, and then try to replicate on the group. So far as the currencies are concerned, I think when we are looking into the countries who have already expressed their desire and where the banks have tie-up, these are across the geographies. We have already tied up with around 19 countries, 64 banks are in the pipeline. But I think to start with the process, we have to look into what are the challenges, why system is not working in a big way. Please bear in mind that this is an additional window which has been provided to the trade. The existing mechanisms are in place. It's much more better to start with a kind of swap arrangement, because then both sides are insulated against the foreign currency risk. When we are talking about the rupee, on the Indian side, they are insulated because they are paying for imports and getting paid for exports in rupee. But the other side, they have to get the payment in their currency. And since with most of these countries, we are not having a direct exchange rate, the cross currency comes into the play, which eats around 3 to 4% of the entire transaction value. And the other side is therefore little reluctant to that. So it's a very good move, because we will be able to trade with those countries who are short of the foreign exchange.
All right, Dr. Rao, last word from you. Now, we've been hearing about de-dollarization for a while right now. Do you think it's in the near future? Do you think, for example, are we going to continue to have country-specific swap arrangements? Or do you think it's possible that another currency could come, the BRICS currency comes? I'm not sure India and countries like India would accept the yuan as a currency. So what, if anything, could replace the dollar?
You really have to extend the time horizon pretty longish. It's not going to be an event. It's going to be a process, that too a slow-moving process, because as Dr. Sahai also put it rightly, you at multilateral agencies, perhaps the trade negotiations are very cumbersome and many a times counterproductive. Regional trades would be the way forward, but there would be some counter interests in the play, how to utilize those surpluses. That also needs to be thought through. Yes, prima facie on paper, it's extremely efficient mode of taking your currency offshore and bring rupee as a more acceptable medium of exchange. But there's a whole lot of groundwork that needs to get done. To start with, we should also consider now looking at fully capital account convertibility as we move ahead, with an aspiration of India growing at about $2 trillion of exports by 2030.
Dr. Rao, Dr. Sai, thank you so much for joining us. Let's see what happens with the currencies.